Hey everybody. Just got out of school. My first class was canceled, so I wasted like 3 hours that I could have been doing something else, so that was fun. Um, but anyway, I had an idea a couple weeks ago that since all my friends are away at college, or they're still in high school and I'm in college, and I see like two of you guys regularly, I figured I could make a video series of me talking to my phone while I'm driving home from school. That way I can kind of bounce my ideas off you guys. You guys can respond in the comments on Facebook, text me, email me, talk to me in person, whatever you want. And it would just be a good way for us to stay in touch after high school. So, something that I've been thinking about quite a bit is Star Wars, because Disney's making all the new movies. I think a Han Solo movie's coming out next year. Obviously, episodes 8 and 9 will be coming out. I don't know what else there's talks for. I heard rumors of a Boba Fett movie, which would be cool, but I'm not sure if that's confirmed or if it got scrapped. But today I want to talk about the prequels, because the prequels get a lot of hate, and whenever I saw them as a kid, I really enjoyed them, and that feeling is stuck with me. But I want to just address the elephant in the room, which is midichlorians. That's the stupidest idea. The idea that your potential for the Force is not based off the person, but based off these microscopic life forms that live in your blood, it's a little far-fetched. And what I think would be interesting for the narrative would be it's a Jedi myth. Like, you see throughout the prequels that the Jedi are kind of corrupt, and they're not really in tune with the Force throughout the entire prequel trilogy, which is what leads to their downfall eventually. So I'm willing to bet that midichlorians either don't actually exist and their counters are just something weird, or that midichlorians do exist and they have nothing to do with Force potential. Maybe it's a byproduct of the Force. Maybe it's something that the Force leaves behind in a person, but it has nothing to do with their potential. Because if you look at it, Obi-Wan Kenobi had a very low midichlorian count, but he's one of the greatest Jedi to ever live because he worked hard and he trained. So he was able to exceed his potential. Then I don't think midichlorians actually are the potential of a Force user. So mainly with this, I just want to talk about why I enjoy the prequels, bounce some ideas and theories off you guys, and see what you guys think. You can tell me in the comments how stupid I am and how crappy these movies are. You can say, oh, I gained a new appreciation, or you can say, I have always liked these movies. You don't need to convince me to like the prequels. Or you can say, Ethan Trokey, that I've never watched Star Wars, but now I really want to. Go watch Star Wars. Everybody shame Ethan into watching Star Wars. But one thing I do want to talk about is the Force Ghosts and how they relate to the prequels. Because very few Jedi actually come back as Force Ghosts. You had Yoda and Obi-Wan and Anakin from the original trilogies, and none are shown in the prequels, but in episode 3 it's mentioned that Qui-Gon has come back. He's learned a technique or learned how to come back as a Force Ghost, which surprises Obi-Wan. I'm guessing because it hasn't happened in a while. So it's not something that's unique to the Jedi as a whole. It's unique to a very select few Jedi. And what's interesting about Qui-Gon being the first, obviously not first in release, but the first in the timeline of Star Wars, is that Qui-Gon's ideology, while it went with the Jedi on many different points, he converged. Like, he was known as a rebel in the Jedi Order, which is why he was never put on the Jedi Council. Even though he was a master and he was really respected by the Council, he was too much of a wild card in the Jedi Order to actually be put on the Council. And one big thing that really differed with Qui-Gon was his emphasis on the living force. You hear him all the time telling Obi-Wan to be mindful of the living force. And the living force is not the light side or the dark side. The living force is the actual will of the force. And I think that because of Qui-Gon's special attention to the living force, that's what made him so in tune with the force that allowed him to come back as a force ghost. And in the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon comes before Yoda and teaches him the techniques to become a force ghost. And I would assume that he also taught Obi-Wan, which is why Yoda and Obi-Wan came back as force ghosts. And I have two theories for why Anakin was able to. Either he can do it because he's the chosen one, like he was born of the Force, so he has a natural affinity towards the will of the Force. Or there was a book called The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader, which is basically the entire life of Anakin. It's the entire story of Star Wars told from Anakin's perspective. And in that book, it was either right as he died, like before he actually died, or right after he died, Obi-Wan's spirit came and talked to Anakin and taught him how in the last second to become a Force ghost. I think that's kind of stupid because, you know, either Anakin was already dead or on the verge of death, and I'm sure it took a while to learn this technique. So I'm thinking just because Anakin was the chosen one, like, he didn't have a father, his father was basically the Force, that he already kind of had a foot in the door, so to speak, to becoming a Force ghost. It's kind of like in Greek mythology, how demigods could become gods if the gods allowed it, because they kind of already had a foot in the door of being a god. So that's my thoughts with that. And another thing that the prequels really get hate for is Jar Jar Binks, which, as a 4 or 5-year-old watching Star Wars, I really loved Jar Jar Binks. He's just this silly character. But in the past week or so, I was thinking about it, because I was thinking about doing this video. I recorded it earlier, but the quality was so terrible because this car hides zero noise of the road, and I was on the highway going 70 miles an hour, so you couldn't even hear my voice on the recording at all. But I came to a different conclusion about Jar Jar, that he, there's obviously the theory of him being a Sith Lord, and my thought was he's just like a Chewbacca character. He's the alien of the group. He has a draw with kids because, Chewie kind of looks like a teddy bear, and Jar Jar is silly and goofy. My theory was that he was just there to attract kids, but I was thinking about it last night, actually, that at least in Episode 1, I think Jar Jar is the personification of the will of the Force. And that's why Qui-Gon's the one to run into him, and because he's mindful of the living Force. And that's how Jar Jar survives all of his endeavors. Like, I'm guessing the reason that the Jedi in general don't follow the will of the Force is because it seems counterproductive to their goals. Because the Jedi have become political and all about the light side of the Force, there's a Jedi named Plo Koon. In episode 3, you see him die. One of the clones shoot down his starship. And he developed a technique to absorb dark side energy and release it as force lightning. Or it was some light side equivalent of force lightning. And the Jedi Council didn't want him teaching people that. They didn't even want him using it because they felt it was too close to channeling the dark side of the Force. So even though it was a useful technique, and it didn't actually use Plo Koon's rage or dark side energy to use, they still didn't want him to use it because it was against their misguided beliefs of the Force. So I believe that Jar Jar seems so silly to everybody because it's counterproductive to what we think the good side should be. But if you look at everything he does, he advances the plot by getting the Jedi to Theed Palace to rescue Queen Amidala. He becomes a war general for his people, and in episodes 2 and 3, he becomes a advisor to the senator from his planet, and eventually the surrogate senator for his planet, and he ends up giving power to the Emperor. And I believe this is because he represents the will of the Force. In episode 1, I really do think the balance of the Force is twisted to the light. And because of that, the will of the Force is constantly trying to get back into balance with Anakin. But that would have never happened if Anakin had remained on the side of the light and the balance remained on the light side. So the reason Anakin had to turn to the dark side was so that he wouldn't be misguided in his goal of balancing the Force by the Jedi's incorrect perception of what balance should be. Because the Jedi always think, it's shown with Obi-Wan's statements after defeating Anakin on Mustafar, it was said you're supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them. But in actuality, the prophecy said that the Chosen One would rebalance the Force. And no matter which side it's twisted to, whether you agree that the Jedi had all this power so the balance of the Force was on the light, or because the Jedi couldn't really see what's right in front of their face the entire time, the balance of the Force is on the dark, and Emperor Palpatine was in control the entire time, it doesn't really matter. The fact is, the Jedi had to be destroyed in order to make way for Anakin to bring balance. And I believe Jar Jar really helped to bring that about, because if Chancellor Palpatine never had the emergency powers that Jar Jar requested, then we wouldn't really have a reason for Order 66. Because if, in the end, after Order 66, if no one had granted Palpatine power, then the war was over, he would have been out of office, and he would have had to have a different method of taking power. And maybe it wouldn't have even happened. Maybe Yoda and Obi-Wan would have converged on Palpatine and taken him out. I don't know. But Anakin had to turn to the dark side for his path to be made clear later by Luke. And Jar Jar was an instrument of that happening. So that's my thought on Jar Jar. I just had it last night. It might not be fully flushed out. Tell me in the comments or in person or whatever that I'm an idiot and I'm wrong, and tell me why Jar Jar sucks. But the whole point of the prequels was to tie up loose ends caused by the story of the original trilogy. So you hear Obi-Wan, Old Ben, mention in passing the Clone Wars, and how Luke's father, who his family told was like a spice trader, some kind of Outer Rim pilot. But then through Obi-Wan we learned that no, Luke's father was a Jedi who was killed by Darth Vader, who he had already met previously in the beginning scene with Leia. So it's like already, because of that statement, we know the conflict is between Luke and the man who killed his father, or so we think at that time. But you hear mention of this Clone Wars, and we don't get any explanation of that. It's just a passing remark. It's kind of like after World War I, World War II, World War I specifically, because it was called the Great War. People would refer to, oh, years ago in the Great War, such and such happened. And everybody knows what the Great War is. You didn't need to explain to Luke, oh, years ago in the Clone Wars, which was this specific engagement between these two sides for this reason. No. I'm sure they have schooling in the Star Wars universe, and Luke has heard tale of the Clone Wars in history class, or the Star Wars equivalent. But we as the viewer don't know what the Clone Wars is, what the Clone Wars are. And that's the whole purpose. That's the reason the prequels are so politics heavy, which is another major complaint. I didn't mind it. There's enough action in those, and the lightsaber fights are much better than the originals, that it keeps me satiated. But in episode 1, you get the start of the conflict. You have a rogue trade federation exploiting a planet for money, basically, for control and power, which was Naboo. And in episode 2, we learned that in the decade or so between episode 1 and 2, the Trade Federation has formed like this whole alliance of, it's basically like the Civil War. You have all these planets trying to leave the Republic and form their own thing, and the Republic fighting back. And then we learned that we have this clone army, and all of a sudden, okay, now I get it. The Clone Wars were called that because the Grand Army of the Republic was made up of clone troopers, which looks suspiciously like stormtroopers. I wonder what that's supposed to mean. But it's made up of clone troopers. So obviously, we call it the Civil War because it was a war inside our state. We call it a World War because most of the world's countries were involved in it. So it's a Clone Wars because it was fought by clones. Makes sense. And kind of the whole point in episode 3, Yoda's revelation at the end after losing to Sidious is that he lost the fight before it ever began, because he had lost his way, which is why he went to Dagobah for more training and just basically went into hiding. He had lost his way as a Jedi, which I think, I don't know, the prequels are a really powerful story. They're supposed to mirror, George Lucas has said that the prequels are supposed to mirror the events of the original trilogy. So, in the way that the original trilogy is all about gaining independence from under an oppressive rule, it does the same thing in the prequels. Anakin is gaining his independence from this oppressive Jedi rule that has become corrupt. In the same way, the way they mirror each other, one is the story of a character's fall. The prequel is the story of Anakin's fall from grace, how he became this monster that was Darth Vader. And then the original trilogy are the story of his redemption, how Darth Vader returned to his original purpose. It's kind of a biblical allusion, how Genesis is the story of man's fall, and then Revelation is picking up the pieces. It's kind of that idea. I didn't really talk much about the prequels in the story, but that's okay. Hopefully what I've said has convinced Ethan to go watch Star Wars. Everybody go shame Ethan into watching Star Wars. Oh, man. I don't understand how you're alive for almost 20 years now and you don't see Star Wars. Oh well. But I really like the prequels. If you ignore the politics is a really important part of the story. But if you go under the assumption the politics are a way to show how the Jedi have become corrupted, and I think that's a really powerful scene when Darth Vader kills Padme. Because at the same time, Anakin was a Jedi. He was in bed with the politicians, so to speak. And you see that, quite literally, he's in bed with a politician. But at the same time, he knows it's corrupt. You see that in the scene on Naboo with Anakin and Padme in Episode 2. You see that he doesn't trust politicians. He knows it's corrupt. He knows the Republic is corrupt. And with Darth Vader killing Padme on Mustafar in Episode 3, he's rejecting the politics, while at the same time getting in bed with another master. He's leaving the Republic for a dictatorial rule with Emperor Palpatine at the head. So, in that sense, Anakin is a really tragic character. That the more he tries to get away from this corrupt system, the more he gets in bed with them. The more he tries to reject politics and the corruption it causes and the evils that he sees it cause in the world, in the universe around him, the more he can't help but get drawn into their web. I don't know. I like Star Wars. I may not be the best at dissecting the themes. Ooh, that voice crack. Excuse me. But I may not be the best at explaining the themes within them. I can theorize all I want. But in the end, everything I just told you could be completely inaccurate to what George Lucas intended or for what most people interpret the meaning to be. That's just my thoughts. And for me, personally, the story of Star Wars is very much the story of Anakin Skywalker. And that's why Rogue One is called a Star Wars story rather than being an actual episode. That and the fact that it would be really stupid if they went the Lion King route and called it episode 3.5. But I really do think that the reason all these spin-off movies are called Star Wars stories is because the saga of Star Wars, the actual episodes, are the story of the Skywalker family. Prequels about Anakin, originals about Luke, and I guess the focus of 7, 8, and 9 is going to be Kylo Ren's story, because he seems to be the main character of the Skywalker line. I don't know how Rey is going to fit into it. This is the first time that the main Skywalker character isn't
the main protagonist. So I'm curious how that's going to end up in episode 8 and 9. I'll have to wait till December. I'm really excited. I didn't care too much for episode 7. It was too much A New Hope done wrong. But I enjoyed it. I thought Kylo Ren was cool whenever he wasn't throwing a temper tantrum. I thought Poe was cool whenever he wasn't assumed dead. I thought Finn was cool whenever he wasn't a coward. And I thought Rey was cool whenever she wasn't, what's the proper term? Whenever she wasn't aggravated. She just looked aggravated and angry at everyone for most of that movie. And it was kind of off-putting. Because you see Anakin's rage, but you see other sides to him as well. And it seems like all we got from Rey in this movie was the rage of being left behind, the rage of, I don't know. Rey wasn't written very well in episode 7, I don't feel. But I'm home now. Give me ideas about what to talk about next. You know, tell me your theory on Star Wars. Tell me your theory of another movie, and I'll talk to you next time about that movie. Or if you don't like what I'm doing here, just say, Jared, you're doing stupid stuff. Stop it. Find something else to do with your time. And I'll say, okay, fine. I'll give up on this. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And I hope you guys respond so I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself. But I hope you guys are doing well in school. Hope you guys, everything's going well for you guys. And talk to you guys later.